Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, how's it going? So, today is Sunday afternoon, and I figured I would sit down and talk about the fight that took place last night between Terence Crawford and Israil Madrimov. Crawford, of course, winning a very, very close and competitive unanimous decision. And yeah, the fight was very, very interesting to me. Now, those of you who saw my video that I made in the build-up to the fight will know that prior to the fight being announced, I didn't really think that much of Madrimov. In fact, I'd never seen a full fight of Madrimov prior to that. And then when the fight first got scheduled, I just took a look at Madrimov's record, and I saw that the guy had only had about 10 or 11 fights, and not at a particularly high level. But I did look a little bit into his amateur background and whatnot, and you know, he was clearly one of these really, really highly touted Uzbek amateurs, you know, who kind of stayed in the amateurs for a long time and had a big number of fights. But yeah, basically as a professional, I initially didn't think he had anywhere near enough experience to trouble somebody like Crawford. I just thought it was kind of a foregone conclusion, and Crawford's team, his handlers, kind of picked the right guy essentially to get him a title in his fourth weight division. However, when I really looked at the fight a bit more closely, and when I started watching some of Madrimov's fights, I was actually really surprised with what I saw. Madrimov to me looked to be a little bit better than his record suggested. And again, those of you that saw that video will know, I very much expected this to be a difficult fight for Crawford. I actually really was intrigued by it, and I was really struggling to envision in my mind how Crawford was going to go in there and do a number on this guy. Like, I figured if it was a real fight, if it was a genuine fight without any weight stipulations or dodgy gloves or mob activity behind the scenes, I thought this was going to be a very hard fight for Crawford. But I still thought that Crawford, with his experience, you know, with him being the A side, and with it being essentially a fight that was handpicked for him, you know, it's clear that the people behind the scenes wanted Crawford to win. I just thought it was very unlikely that at this stage of his career, and I talked about this on my live stream that I made yesterday afternoon, I thought it was very unlikely that they would allow Madrimov to get the win. But yeah, the fight was very close, it was very competitive. Madrimov did a very good job at kind of setting up Crawford with feints and finding a way around Crawford's guard, landing overhand rights, landing straight rights, you know, splitting the guard, stuff like that. What he didn't really have to me was a particularly good jab, so he didn't really have anything to set up his big power punches, which is why he wasn't able to really stamp his authority on the fight and get the stoppage. And as the fight went on, Crawford, who had the better stamina of the two and was more experienced, Crawford was able to pick holes in Madrimov's game and was able to figure him out. And as the fight went on, Madrimov kind of slowed down, and I think towards the end of the fight, Crawford, again, his experience, you know, his durability and his physicality, the things that he often relies on, saw him through to a very close victory that could have gone either way, in my opinion. You know, I wouldn't have argued either way. But those of you who have kind of seen my comments in the aftermath of the fight will know that I've been having a bit of fun in the aftermath of this fight. I've been kind of winding people up a little bit in comments. I've been going around to videos and I've been saying things like, you know, what I've essentially been doing is I've been kind of playing Crawford's fan base at their own game and doing what they like to do towards other fighters who are, you know, I guess rivals to Terence Crawford's place on the pound-for-pound list. So one of the things you'll notice about Crawford is he has a very specific type of fan base, right? He's one of these fighters who, similarly to the likes of Andre Ward and Guillermo Rigondeaux and Demetrius Andrade and guys like that, he has this very dedicated fan base of commenters on the internet who basically, if you go to any video involving Crawford and you say anything about him in the comments, it doesn't even need to be anything particularly critical or egregious, but if you say anything about him that doesn't paint him in a particularly positive light, or you don't essentially talk about how great he is and bloviate about him and whatnot, these guys are sure to show up out of nowhere and crucify you in the comments and start giving you all the statistics and accusing you of having ulterior motives and basically just always being there on call 24/7 to defend Terence Crawford's honour whenever his name is mentioned in a not so positive light in the comment section. So in the aftermath of this fight, I've been winding a lot of these people up, because one of the things that these people will often do, like if you mention the likes of Lomachenko, for example, they'll say something like, how can Lomachenko be on the pound for pound list ahead of Crawford when Lomachenko lost to a guy with 19 fights, or Lomachenko lost to a guy who had 14 losses, or Lomachenko this, Lomachenko that, and you know, they'll come up with these like really baseless statistics, you know, like him losing to a guy with a certain amount of fights, but they won't really go into the deeper context, if you know what I mean, like regarding the circumstances of those fights. And they'll bring up Crawford being like 43-0, they'll bring up his knockout percentage, but again, they'll do this entirely without context. So what I decided to do in the aftermath of this fight, just to wind people up a bit, is I've been going into comments and I've been saying, basically bringing up Crawford going life and death and struggling with a guy who's only had 10-11 fights. And a guy who had a draw against Michel Soro. And I've been putting the bait out there, and several people have taken the bait, and I've seen some of these guys in the comment section getting really pissed off, really wound up, getting really irate over it. And it's just funny, man. I've been having fun with it, just like trolling these guys today. So yeah, if you see me like going back and forth with somebody and being a little bit immature in the comment section, you know that I'm only being partially serious, right? You know that I'm just winding people up, but I digress. So yeah, I found that kind of interesting. But the fight itself was very intriguing to me, because all joking aside, like in all seriousness, it was a very good fight and a very interesting fight. And what happened with it, to me, was it highlighted what I've been saying for a long time about Terence Crawford, and that is the fact that as good as Terence Crawford is, and as great as his record is on paper, what I've always said about him is, to me, he is a physical fighter. And what I mean by that is he's a guy who, rather than relying on his technical proficiency and relying on his skills, to me, he's a guy who purely relies on his physicality. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some technique there, alright? He's got decent punching technique, and he's, you know, quite economical with his strength and whatnot. But primarily, Crawford is a physical fighter. Primarily, he's a guy who relies on his God-given genetics, right? He's a very genetically gifted fighter. Very strong, very durable, you know, great chin. He's able to outlast his opponents, you know, great stamina usually. And usually throughout his career, what separated Crawford between his opponents, and without even bringing up like the weight stipulations and the loaded gloves and all that good stuff, yeah, but what separated Crawford primarily from his opponents was size, right? He always had the size advantage. He's always the bigger guy. You know, one of these snack athletes who is able to use diuretics and shady tactics to make weight, whereas his opponents are basically drained to within an inch of their life. You know, we saw that with the likes of Errol Spence, for example, and his opponents, and Kell Brook's another prime example of this. His opponents have dehydration clauses, so they're not able to drain down to that division with the same kind of pharmaceutical help that Crawford is. And again, with Crawford just being the bigger guy in general in most of his fights, the more durable guy, you'll see him get outboxed by someone like David Avanesian, or Aegis Kavalauskas, or Amir Khan, or guys like that. Even Ricky Burns in spots was able to outbox him. You know, even Jose Benavidez was able to outbox him in spots. But Crawford, being so much bigger and stronger than these guys, he's able to outlast them and break them down. And usually, in most cases, he's able to stop them. But you'll notice whenever Crawford fights somebody who is even remotely his own size and who isn't drained, well, he doesn't look to be as tenacious, does he? He doesn't look to be as effective. And the prime example of that, and the fight I always go back to, is the Victor Postal fight, where Crawford had to basically run and spoil and cheat and foul his way to a controversial decision victory in that fight. And this fight, to some extent, it was similar in the sense that Madrimov brought to the table some of the same physical attributes that Postal did. Now, he's not as good as Postal, technically, Madrimov, but what Madrimov does have that Postal doesn't have is he's a lot more unorthodox. You know, he throws punches from weird angles, very jittery, very herky-jerky, feints constantly. And he throws, I kind of compared him to Mike Tyson in my video, in the sense that he'll sometimes square up and he'll wind up on his hooks. And he throws very, very fast, very, very powerful hooks from either stance, essentially. And I felt that he was always going to be a tough fight for Crawford. And what you'll notice is that Crawford in this fight had to rely on boxing fundamentals a lot more than he has in previous fights. He had to really, really mind his defense. And he still got hit quite a lot in the fight, but he used a high guard a lot more than usual. You know, he used a jab a lot more than usual. He had to do things to kind of get control of the fight that he doesn't normally have to do, being so big and so strong usually. But fighting this guy, and don't get me wrong, these guys were pretty much the same size. It's not like Madrimov had like a big size advantage or anything like that. He really didn't. You know, Crawford was slightly taller and had slightly more muscle definition. It's just that Madrimov looked a little bit thicker to me, you know, a little bit more filled into the division. So both guys were relatively the same size. And you saw that Terence Crawford isn't this pound-for-pound technical genius that people claim he is. You know, the idea of being a fighter who's on the pound-for-pound list, as far as I'm concerned, you know, if you want me to call a fighter pound-for-pound, they have to be technical fighters. You know, they have to be very, very high IQ technical boxers. And I've never seen Terence Crawford as a high IQ technical boxer. I've always, like I said, I've always seen him as more of a physical fighter, more of an athlete. And you saw him for the first time in a long, long time fighting an opponent who wasn't drained, right, who wasn't compromised in some way. And you saw the level that Terence Crawford is. He fought a guy who was 10-1, or 10-0 with one draw. I think that's Madrimov's record. So a relative novice in the professional ranks. I know he had a lot of amateur fights, but so did Crawford. Okay, both of these guys were top-level amateurs, so you know, you can't always read into that too much. The fact of the matter is this guy had no marquee wins at world level as a professional. And given the difference in experience, had Crawford been this top pound-for-pound level fighter, he should have absolutely schooled and dominated this guy. And he didn't do it. Now, I saw somebody, you know, coping in the comments. One of Crawford's, you know, regular commenters, one of his fanboys, claiming that, oh, well, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of, but because me and several others are saying, because Crawford struggled with Madrimov, you know, a fighter of Madrimov's level, who happens to be around about his size, that proves that Crawford isn't a pound-for-pound level fighter, or he shouldn't be pound-for-pound number one. And then this person was saying, well, what about Usyk? He struggled with Fury. That was a similar type of fight. You know, basically trying to compare and conflate Madrimov having a tough fight, or Crawford having a tough fight with Madrimov, to Usyk having a tough fight with Fury. Now, do I really need to explain to you guys what a fallacy that is? Should I even try to apply logic to that situation? Because yeah, Usyk struggling against a guy who has a 6-inch height advantage and a 40-pound weight advantage, who happens to be an all-time great heavyweight, arguably, that struggling with that guy and coming back to drop the guy and win, that's the equivalent, apparently, according to this guy, of struggling against a guy who's an 11-fight novice, who's a similar size to you, if not even smaller. Like, so yeah, as you can tell, I'm in a good mood today. I've been having fun with some of these people, and look, it's nothing personal, okay? I've got nothing against Crawford. Crawford's a good fighter. He is. Like I said, he's a very tough guy. He's a very durable guy, and I've got nothing against him. I've got no personal problem with Terence Crawford, But just keep it real, he's not a great fighter. He's not a pound-for-pound level fighter. He's a tough guy. He's a durable guy. He's very, very genetically gifted. He's very, very strong for a man of his size. And he's got a great record on paper. But let's be honest, the guy's a habitual cheater who has been known to use loaded gloves. Right? His opponents have been forced to fight with weight stipulations. And had he been fighting guys, and I think I feel vindicated now after seeing what happened against Madrimov, had he been fighting guys who were his own size or bigger, he'd be a journeyman. Let's be honest. If Terence Crawford from his professional debut had fought at his natural weight division against men who were his size and who were on his level technically, he wouldn't be 43-0. Okay, at best he would be probably like 25-10 or something like that. He'd be like a high-level journeyman. Right, that's what Crawford would be. He's nowhere near on the level of someone like Lomachenko, skill-wise, right? He's nowhere near on the level of Naoya Inoue, of Chocolatito Gonzalez, of even someone like Bam Rodriguez, in my opinion, has shown a higher boxing IQ than Crawford has. Okay, and Usyk is just on another level to Crawford in terms of not only his boxing IQ, but even physicality. I'd say Crawford's even more of a Usyk's even more of a genetic freak, and you know, Usyk's got even better accomplishments. You know, he's beat better competition as far as I'm concerned. So I think Crawford fanboys got a little bit of a reality check with this fight. He's a good fighter. He's a tough guy. He's a high-level journeyman. But he's not an elite fighter. I wouldn't even... I'd say he's world-class, but he's not elite. And I think it will be wise for you guys to wind your necks in a little bit and stop attacking us every time we criticise Crawford or point out his obvious flaws technically. You know, he's a fighter who gets hit. He's not this unbeatable monster and this technical genius that can't be touched and can't be stopped like people claim he is. He's a very flawed fighter. Okay, and if he continues to fight at world level at 154, he's going to lose unless they're very, very careful with handpicking his opposition. So it's going to be interesting because for a long time, Crawford fanboys were just so arrogant with the guy. Like, it's a situation where if you even suggest that somebody could beat him in a fight, these people get genuinely offended. Like when I made a video years ago claiming that Josh Taylor could potentially beat Terence Crawford in a fight. I said this in a video. I've said it in a couple of videos. People got so mad and so offended and so butthurt about that. And like, no, Crawford's a pound-for-pound #1 fighter. He would smash him. And I'm just like, guys, have you any idea? Like, think, just, again, take into consideration everything I've said in this video about what happened in the Madrimov fight and how Crawford has never been able to compete to the same level against a fighter his size or bigger, right? Have you any idea how much bigger Josh Taylor is than Terence Crawford? If that fight happened, right, let's say, look, that fight's never going to happen, so who cares, right? But so I'm wasting my time here. But, guys, if Josh Taylor moved up to welterweight, was fully filled out at the weight, was healthy, was hydrated, you know, still had his faculties about him, you know, was off the gear and whatnot, and was just a stage of his career where he was still developing, right, and was still motivated and was still trying to achieve something, right, and him and Crawford at their absolute best fight in the welterweight division, right, or 154, wherever, where both guys are healthy. Guys, I'm not even joking. Josh Taylor would beat the absolute piss out of Terence Crawford. Have you any idea what a stylistic mismatch that fight is? Name me one fighter that Crawford has fought in his entire career who, for one, was bigger than him, right? Significantly bigger. Not only that, not only was he bigger, but could fight on the inside with the kind of precision and the kind of tenacity and the kind of schooling that Josh Taylor has, right? Look at Josh Taylor in his prime on the inside against world-class fighters at 140, where he's pivoting, he's getting underneath punches, he's working the body, he's coming up top with hooks and uppercuts. You know, he's able to accurately read his opponents to the point where he's able to get foot position on them, back them up to the ropes, and come in at angles and just riddle their body and like I said, come up top with hooks and uppercuts and break these guys down systematically. And if he needs to, he can take a shot and duke it out with these guys. He's got great stamina. Guys, Josh Taylor would beat the absolute piss out of Terence Crawford in a fair... That's not even... That's a stylistic mismatch. And again, I said this years ago, that if that fight happened, prime for prime, Taylor would win. And I stand by it to this day. So, again, like I said, who has Crawford ever fought? Look at Crawford against Victor Postal, right? Guys, Josh Taylor was able to beat Victor Postal convincingly in his 13th professional fight, right? Dropped him, outworked him, outmuscled him, figured him out, got the better of him inside, had some problems, right, early on, but was able to figure him out as the fight went on, and proved to be the technically superior fighter as that fight went on. You're telling me Crawford would beat him? Really? Like, that's guys, that's nonsense, alright? He wouldn't. And again, there's guys at 154 that would be a nightmare for Crawford, okay? Guys like Virgil Ortiz, if he's healthy, if he's able to find a way to cope with that horrible CrossFit disease that he's got, whatever it's called, the rhabdo, the thing with the clown, I don't know, whatever it's called. If he's able to deal with that, and if he's able to get himself back in decent health, he beats the piss out of Crawford unless he's compromised in some way. Dehydration clauses and whatnot. Tim Tszyu would be a nightmare for Crawford. Even somebody like Sebastian Fundora, a guy with a long reach, southpaw, that's a hard fight for Crawford. Crawford's never fought anybody even remotely that big. He is so overrated that it's comical. Guys, I know, again, I'm rambling here. I don't know why I'm even wasting my time, but I mean, Madrimov is not exactly prime Triple G, is he? Okay, Madrimov is a guy who, like I said, he's had about 11 professional fights, and he wasn't even able to convincingly beat someone like Michel Soro. And the best victory, the best performance was probably against Kurbanov. A guy who went life and death with Liam Smith and and several others. I mean, Crawford is a good fighter, but he's not a great fighter, okay? He's a very, very good C-level journeyman, okay? He's a high-level journeyman, and he's a manufactured hype job, but he's a good fighter. So I think we know Terence Crawford's level now, and like I said, his handlers are going to have to be very careful with him going forward. I suspect he might move back down to welterweight, because he can go back to fighting guys smaller than him, because if he stays at 154... and if they're not very careful with weight stipulations and loaded gloves and whatnot, and just fixed fights in general, manufactured outcomes in general, he's going to have a lot of problems at that weight division. So yeah, that's all I've got to say. Crawford was, again, he was exposed for what he is, and that's a good fighter. Not a great fighter, but a good fighter. A great fighter would have, with the gap in experience, would have done so much better against Madrimov, So that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. God bless.